I cannot see Jean, who is our speaker. I think she's stuck in plenary. Just please.
I am here.
Good. Good, Jean. I'm happy you managed. Perfect. So thank you to everyone for joining this room. As you all know, we're here to listen from the presentation from Guyana, and we will have Jean LaRose from APA that will be sharing her experience. Jean, I will share my screen and I will leave the floor to you. Let me know if you can all see it nicely. Oops. Can you all see my screen, Jean? Can you see it?
I can.
Perfect. Then, Jean, thank you again for being available for this presentation. The floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all who are joining here. And thank you to the Tenure facility for giving me the opportunity to present our story from the Amerindian People's Association of Guyana. Just to present a bit of a background, in July 2019, the APA, as we call, began our project securing and enhancing indigenous land tenure in Guyana. This project which was expected to last for 2 years, but which has since been extended, aims to address land titling, demarcation, and land management of 14 indigenous communities, and to promote legislative changes to support land tenure security and related rights. So here you are seeing a map of Guyana, and it shows how we are situated: Venezuela to the west, Brazil to the west and south, Suriname to the east, and the Atlantic Ocean to the north and east as well. And we also have an area, Barima Waini, which is in region 1 and region 2, region 4 and region 6 at the top. And I'll explain a bit about that to you shortly. And then at the bottom, where there's that partial map of Guyana, it's region 9. So 6 villages in regions 1, 2, 4, and 6 to the north of Guyana form part of the project, as well as 8 in region 9. The regions 1, 2, 4, and 6 are coastal or near coastal communities, while region 9, which is at the furthermost point from the coast and the capital, is in the south. The communities in regions 1, 2, 4, and 6 are mostly of the Warao, Lokono, and Carib peoples, and they mainly rely on subsistence farming, fishing, hunting, gathering, and logging as economic activities. Their environment is highly forested, savanna wetlands, and riverine. They also depend on the Atlantic Ocean for fishing. So as you can see, we are close to the Atlantic Ocean. The Region 9 communities are mostly Wapichan and Kushi, and they rely on subsistence farming, cattle rearing, hunting, fishing, gathering, and small-scale logging and mining as economic activities. Their environment is mostly savanna grassland and mountainous, with some forested areas. And I refer to regions 1, 2, 4, 6, and 9. Guyana is divided into 10 administrative regions, and indigenous peoples live in many of those regions. So all the economic activities earlier described take place in the lands and territories of the communities we refer to, whether they are titled or not, and I'll explain to you what that means, being titled or not being titled, as we go along. The people depend on the forest, savanna, river, and mountain, where they either hunt, fish, raise their cattle, or cultivate, or seek food, medicines, or other products. These lands are also home to sacred sites and culturally significant areas to the communities. Irrespective of where the indigenous communities are located, they all rely on their environment for survival, and they all need security of land tenure to ensure survival as indigenous peoples. In Guyana, you have indigenous communities that have legal titles to their land, and you have some that do not have legal titles to the land, but are lands that they traditionally occupy and use and that are very important and significant to the communities. Here you see a photo of the Savannah region in Region 9, which is southern Guyana, and you can see the mountains in the background. As I had described earlier, the land is very rich for cattle grazing. And of course, like I said, there are forest areas. Why are the lands and the environment important to Indigenous communities? Indigenous peoples have much to offer towards protection of the environment by simply keeping the trees standing, and in so doing, providing some hopes of slowing the pace of climate change. The relationship between the flora, fauna, and the peoples who inhabit these areas cannot be overemphasized. Communities do not damage the forests and waterways since they know these provide sustenance, medicine, and housing, among other things. In practicing these ways of life, the environment is also kept healthy for the fishes, animals, and plants. All contribute to the upkeep of the environment, and the relationship is a very symbiotic one where we all depend on each other and all contribute to the upkeep of the environment. It's also important in the aspect of land management. Land management, whether lands are officially titled or not to communities, is another way of ensuring some protection of the forest. And this is especially important where communities do not have legal titles to the land, but it is the areas of their traditional use and occupation. In Guyana, conservation projects, protected areas, national parks, and similar initiatives are a recent thing. But Indigenous peoples have been engaged in these practices for centuries. It means that within the national scenario, whether on their title lands or not, Indigenous peoples can continue to practice land management, ensuring the health and sanctity of the forests while contributing to the national efforts of keeping the forest standing. And we cannot overemphasize the need to keep the forest standing as well. In recent times, Indigenous communities in Region 9 have also supported protection of our national borders through monitoring for illegal crossings in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is the communities in the South played a very important role in patrolling the Guyana national borders just to protect the communities. Such monitoring has also sought to prevent cross-border cattle rustling and other illegal activities on a continuous basis. So this is outside of COVID. There are other reasons why monitoring of the borders, including the national borders, is very important. We are neighbors with Brazil down to the south. So if we move on, continue moving on. This here is in one of the communities that form part of the project. The people are actually mapping the land, mapping their boundaries, and they're both males and female actively participating in these activities. And you have youths as well who are participating in the activities. So we have faced some challenges in the project. Working towards security of tenure has never been easy for Indigenous peoples in Guyana, and this is not a new situation that we're dealing with. It's something that we have been confronting for decades. Various factors have hindered how fast titling and demarcation can happen, as is the case with this project. Legislation. Legislation that is not specific on traditional land rights. While we have laws that provide some guidelines for applying for a title, they do not pronounce on traditional rights and also do not cover territorial lands, only individual villages. And it means in such cases, there are activities that can take place in those areas that lie between communities but are not protected by legal titling. Mining, for example, mining concessions can be granted on those lands. There has been no clearly defined process for actual titling and demarcation that takes into account the possible scenarios that can hinder proper titling and demarcation. While some guidelines were developed with participation of stakeholders a few years ago, it is not certain that these guidelines will be used in further demarcation processes. So indigenous community representatives, the forest sector, the mining sector, and so all participated in developing guidelines that would represent their interests, but primarily focus on how this can happen among indigenous communities. These guidelines have not been used recently, although they have not been much activity as well taking place in relation to titling and demarcation. So in previous demarcation exercises, communities reported loss of land because of errors in title descriptions, and or in some cases, or demarcation. Additionally, the spaces for engaging with third-party interests or even among neighboring villages have been limited. As a result, some communities have ended up with poor descriptions on their title documents, overlap in village boundaries, and loss of lands to other communities, among other things. And this is the reason why guidelines should be clear to deal with these inconsistencies. This has created some conflicts where before there were clear understandings as to where communities' boundary lie. Continuing with the challenges, the change in political scenario. At the start of the project, Guyana entered a phase of unforeseen political uncertainty and turmoil. A no confidence motion was passed against the then government to choose to mount legal and other challenges before demitting office. This process took approximately 5 months after court cases were cleared and elections were finally held. It took 5 months for the results of the elections to be declared. And in the meantime, official business, legislative decision making, and so forth could not take place. And even when the new government came into power, moving on decisions, making legislative decisions and policy decisions as well, was very slow, and in fact is still very slow. So there is still the need to see an increase in the pace of legislative and policy decision making when it comes to issues surrounding indigenous people's land. In the past year or so, misinformation and intimidation have also dogged the process. For example, communities have reported being told that the APA cannot give them land or land titles. Others have been told that they should not encourage the organization to be in their communities. An official actually made a public statement very recently that the APA does not want titling and demarcation. Why is it that these statements are being made? Indigenous peoples occupy land that are of interest to other parties, mining and other sectors. So it is understandable why the blocks can be put in place. It's not understandable why a people's right should not be protected. While all of these have been said and done to discourage working with the APA, and some persons have become hesitant, they have generally continued to work with the project. And in fact, they have been the source of information as to what they have been told in their various communities. So other challenges include difficulties in accessing information. Many state agencies are the repository for official documents that are needed for the project, and that should be made available as public documents. There has been some reluctance to share information, or in some cases, information is just not easily accessible because of poor storage and other practices. So it's hard to get them. And natural disasters have also played its role. Unseasonal flooding hindered the project to the extent that work had to be put on hold for lengthy periods of time. Movement became difficult and efforts had to be concentrated on ensuring security of food supplies, crops, and homesteads. And if you understand the geography of some of these communities, people can be under meters of water at a time, and their crops and other livelihoods are threatened, as well as their homesteads. And therefore, that's the main issue that would be occupying their efforts at that time. COVID-19 has played a huge role in completely stopping work for months, and interaction with communities came to a standstill. Of course, that can be very understandable why national lockdown, for example, and curfew measures prevented travel from place to place in order to curb the spread of the virus. But the virus itself made travel difficult and unsafe, and therefore to safeguard health and other things, decisions had to be made to try to protect people and not move people around. Despite all of this, project personnel became ill, some more heavily affected than others, and they could not perform their duties, and some are still suffering. And because we have had different waves of the virus in the communities, and because different places are affected at different time, while one place may be clear to travel, another may not be, and it has really hindered work in all regards, but especially project work under this project. The extractive sector has also played some role in insecurity of tenure, especially in mining and logging, and I did hint a little bit earlier about that. These have been ongoing issues for decades, often with social, environmental, and land conflict issues being the main problem. And then we have a new challenge, a new oil scenario. Guyana has become a recent oil producer, and while this is set to put the country on solid economic footing in some regards, there is need for many things to be put in place to match this new economy. Some of these include improved legislation, including those that protect Indigenous people's rights, the environment, and participation in decision making. There is need for legislation and policies to cater for infrastructure expansion and mega projects that are already being talked about, and so forth. The oil economy has the potential to increase activities in the extractive sector, such as in gold and diamond mining, which our interior is very rich in. And these will have direct impact on competing land rights and on the environment. These can have many implications for Indigenous people's land rights as well. So despite all of the challenges, we try to work around these in some instances. And how did we cope with that? We continue with the project activities despite the various difficulties, including activities that did not require official collaboration. A lot of our activities depended on physical body movements from place to place. We had to work very hard to adapt and try to put communication systems in place, very expensive communication systems in place to be able to communicate with each other and therefore reduce the need for physical contact with others. But we also continued work during the low periods of infection when the waves of infection would be low in a community. We work in those communities, taking all precautions, of course. We met with communities and their leaders to clarify positions and to dispel misinformation and the deliberate spreading of rumors. This has proven to be very helpful, but time-consuming as well. We met with new community leaders to share information on project objectives and activities. And this is because during the period, leadership of some of the communities changed, and that impacted the communities that we work with. So we had to do some reorientation with those new leaders. We also pressed ahead in meeting with those officials who were willing to meet despite refusals from others, and telephone calls have been a huge feature of the work of our project personnel, calling different agencies, calling different offices, and so forth. And pressing ahead with securing documentation, even if it meant waiting for hours. So I did say there are difficulties in accessing information. Our project personnel would sit at the Lands and Guyana Lands and Surveys Commission office, waiting on hours just to get information, hard copy of information. And they just waited it out, and that would be the case on many occasions. During COVID and flooding, we provided food supplies, over-the-counter medicines, sanitization products, some small agricultural tools, over-the-counter medication, and a number of supply and support to the communities. We did not only provide to the communities itself, but we also were among the first to reach, whether they were district hospitals, health posts, or health centers who were caught in a very difficult situation of not having any supplies. Even before the government moved in, we were able to do this, and this could have only happened with the support of organizations like the Tenure Facility and others who joined in, who subsequently joined in, and we were able to reach many of the communities, the majority of the communities in the hinterland, while they adapt to the new situation.
Jean, sorry to interrupt you. We have about 8 minutes left. I know that we still have some slides, which are mostly, for example, photos that you were presenting. So I'm not sure if there's anything more, maybe some last words that you would like to say, and then we could maybe leave some time for some questions from the participants that we have in the room.
Yeah, just one last bit. So in facing these challenges, the communities need support. And the support has been very invaluable coming from the Tenure Facility and others. And therefore, technical and financial support is very much needed. These would go a long way in supporting institutional strengthening of the communities. It will go a long way in assisting in participation in the national decision-making and other processes. The communities need more spaces to tell their stories and more spaces for networking. So I'll end there, and thanks for listening, and thanks again for the opportunity to share my thoughts.
Thank you very much, Jean, for the presentation. So as I was saying, we have about 8-9 minutes left. Is there any question that anyone from the group would like to ask to Jean so that she can further comment on some of the things that she was explaining? Please feel free just to raise your hand or to post a question in the chat. Okay, yes, David, please go ahead.
Jean, thank you for an excellent presentation. Could you say a little bit about what the position of the different donors has been, the European Union, the banks, the US, maybe others, about this whole issue? Thank you.
All right, so there has been some support. You specifically single out the EU, and the EU has had ongoing call for proposals in Guyana. So they have played some role in this. Banks no, but you have other support. For example, the NORAD have provided funding support. Recently, there has been support from the French government and from the Swedish Coast Code as well, supporting some of these activities. And there are other funders other foundations who get support similar to the Tenure Facility have been able to offer support in this regard. Bilateral, one such. So there have been some assistance coming. What is important and what would be necessary is to have them sustained to some extent, so that over a period of time, rather than a year or 2 years, but over a longer period of time, to be able to see the results and to be able to actually implement some of the activities.
Thank you. Just a clarification. I was asking as much about political support as about financial support. Have they entered into dialogue with the Guyanese government about these issues?
That's a bit difficult to answer. Very often we do have a situation where yes, we get the funding support and we may get the technical support, but the political support is not so forthcoming in some cases, not always. It's not so forthcoming because we're always told Guyana is a sovereign nation and we can't get involved in this type of discussions.
Thank you, Jean, for answering that. And I saw that Julie also had her hand raised to ask a question. Julie, please go ahead.
Thank you, Jean, for the presentation. as I was listening to this presentation, you were just saying most likely a lot of the things that we are experiencing here in Liberia. But just one question in terms of the misinformation and intimidation, besides holding meetings with the leaders of the communities, are there other ways you are planning to deal with this issue? Because it's very important for the success of your project. And if we have to secure tenure rights for communities, we need to be able to ensure that the right information is out there in the community. So what strategies are you thinking about, again, other than meeting with the leaders, and also with the issue of difficulty in accessing information from national government?
All right, so thank you for the question. One of the things that we plan to step up is actually requesting and following through with meetings, the various government officials, president of the country, for example, he has made a very positive statement, which we would like to encourage him to follow up in terms of legislative changes for the law that govern indigenous peoples in Guyana. And of course, that talks about land rights, land issues as well. So we are going to step up our meetings with these various officials. Of course, we will have to step up our meetings with the communities as well. And we also are thinking of meeting with the various aid agencies and other people who have embassies and high commissions, as in the case, some of the cases in Guyana. We are thinking of meeting with those people as well. But I think the key, one of the main things is working, continuing to work with communities and continue to work with not only individual communities, but collective leadership of the communities. That is very important for the project.
Thank you, Jean, for that. I see we have Gan, who has his hand raised for a question. Please go ahead, Gan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jean. Thanks for your nice presentation and very clear about the Guyana. Just, I would like to know about what's the situation of bilateral funding like World Bank, Green Climate Fund, and other kind of funding. Are they supporting for tenure rights securing, or they are doing other conservation work? Do you have any mechanism to monitor at the country level whether these funds are available for the indigenous peoples and local community association or not? Just I would like to know about this financing, whether climate financing mechanism helping the indigenous people and local communities, or they are curtailing right of these groups. Thank you.
All right, so I'm trying to think how to answer this, because there has been bilateral funding. There has been bilateral funding to the country. For example, the Guyana Forestry Commission has worked on climate change, REDD+ issues, and have included indigenous peoples in the discussions to some extent, not to the full extent that we would like to have, but to some extent have been included in those discussions and in some of their activities. So our feeling is that there is need for more of that. Likewise, in the Office of Climate Change, for example, indigenous peoples have been asked to participate, have been invited to participate in discussions. There is I think just recently launched multi-stakeholder committee for the Low Carbon Development Strategy 2030, which is a national initiative. And the indigenous peoples, sorry.
Jean, sorry, but the room will close in 10 seconds because we already took our half an hour. But we will
Okay.
share contacts in chat if we want to ask more questions, because there were also some questions in chat that